This recipe is for a single large Bakewell tart. So I have 200 grams of plain flour in my bowl and 100 grams of butter or margarine and white vegetable fat on the plate. I like to use a combination of white vegetable fat and butter because I think it gives a nicer pastry, but it's perfectly fine if you just use all margarine. And you need to rub the fat into the flour using just your fingertips. So remember, thumbs over fingertips, pick up a little bit of flour, a little bit of fat, thumbs over fingertips, and rub the two together. Try and keep the palms of your hands clean as you are working, because the palms of your hands are warmer than your fingertips and can make your pastry go greasy. So just keep rubbing until the fat and the flour are mixed evenly, and you can see that I'm turning my bowl from inside. I'm not putting my floury hands on the outside of the bowl in an attempt to keep the worktop cleaner. And it shouldn't take long to rub the fat into the flour. If you want to check if you have any large lumps of flour or large lumps of fat left, all you need to do is to shake your bowl, and any large lumps of mixture will rise to the top. So as soon as that is done, as soon as you can't see any large lumps which are fat, wash your hands and get ready to add the water. Okay, the water for your pastry needs to be cold water, and as I've got 200 grams of flour, you need roughly 1 teaspoon for every 25 grams of flour. So I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons of water. So I've put in 6 teaspoons of water to start with, and I'm just going to stir this with a knife and see if it's going to go together. If it doesn't go together easily, you need to add a little bit more water, and that I can feel is not going to go together. So I'm just going to put the other 2 teaspoons of water in. Give that a stir, and you should see that it starts to form a dough in the bowl before you put your hands in. So once it's started to form a dough, you can put your hands into the bowl and knead that together, and it should form one nice ball of dough that leaves your bowl clean on the inside. Okay, so I have a ball of dough which I'm going to put onto my worktop, and again, before I do anything else, I'm just going to wash my hands. Okay, having got clean hands again, I'm just going to knead this ball of dough lightly on my worktop with a light sprinkling of flour. So just knead very lightly, just to give yourself an even ball of dough. Now, depending on how good your pastry is, you can either roll this out in one piece to make the base for your Bakewell tart, or if your pastry is good to start with, you can take about a quarter of the pastry away, put that to one side. So just put that to one side to do a lattice later. So I've got 3/4 of that pastry dough here, but as I say, you can roll it all out in one go if you would prefer. And I'm just going to knead that until it's nice and smooth on the top and roll this out to fit the tin. And when you are rolling your pastry, remember, if you want it to be a circle when you've finished, Helps if it's a circle when you start. You roll once away from you and turn the pastry. If you turn your pastry every time you roll it, you will soon notice if it's going to stick to the worktop, and you can reflour your worktop before your pastry becomes too stuck. You turn using your whole hand, and I'm just going to add a little bit more pastry and a little bit more flour underneath. Turn using your whole hand and it's easier. You're not then pulling at the pastry. And if you need to pick your pastry up, try and avoid picking it up by the corners, because if you pick it up with two fingers like this, it's quite likely to just fall apart. So to check your pastry is big enough for the tin, put your tin on the top. Depending on the depth of it, you need to see at least the depth of your tin around the edge of this pastry. So I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger, and then getting your pastry into one tin, it's up to you how you do it. You can put your rolling pin in the middle of your pastry, and there we go, move it up a little bit, rolling pin in the middle of the pastry, and lift, putting your hand underneath to support, and unroll that over the tin. Or if you prefer, you can just put your fingers underneath and then spread them to support the pastry as you lift it into the tin. What's important when you put your pastry into the tin is that you don't overstretch it. We've stretched it while we're rolling it, but getting it into this tin, we don't want to make holes on the sides. To avoid getting holes on the sides of the pastry, what you need to do is lift the pastry up and push it down against the edge of the tin. So don't just use your fingers and stretch it even more. Lift the pastry up and allow it to fall to the edge of the tin, and then just press it against the top lip of your dish. Don't stretch it more than is necessary. So I have pastry around the edge of this dish. Because I've kept 2 ounces, 1/4 of my pastry separate, I'm not going to worry about trimming this up now. If you have used all of your pastry for rolling out, you might want to trim it straight away. And to trim this, you just use the back of a knife and go around the edge of your tin. That's if you wish to have enough pastry left to make a lattice top. Because I've already put some pastry to one side, I'm not going to trim all of that. But what I am going to do before I do anything else is I'm going to put some jam in here. This is blackcurrant jam because it's what I had in the cupboard, and I've just stirred it, and you just need about a tablespoon of jam in the bottom of your pastry case. It doesn't need to be too thick a layer, it just has to be a layer in the bottom to give a little bit of flavour when the Bakewell is cut. So there we go, blackcurrant jam, or strawberry, raspberry, whatever flavour you've got in the bottom of the pastry case. That then can be put to one side while you clean your worktop and get ready for making your filling. To make the topping for the Bakewell tart, I have 50 grams of butter or margarine and 50 grams of caster sugar in my bowl. And I'm just adding a little bit of vanilla to that. So a little bit of vanilla in there, and I'm going to cream these together with an electric mixer, or you could use a wooden spoon until they're soft and fluffy. If you're doing this in school and you're running out of time, you can do this mixture as an all-in-one. So if you didn't have time to do it this way, you could put your sugar, your margarine, 1 egg and 50 grams of self-raising flour in the bowl together and mix it all up together. But I have time to cream this, so I'm just going to mix the fat and sugar together first. Okay, the fat and sugar is creamed together and it's soft and fluffy and slightly lighter in colour, and I'm just going to put the whole egg in. Very often with a creaming method, you add your egg a little bit at a time, but as this is a single egg mixture and I'm using the electric mixer, I'm going to put the whole egg in one go and mix again. Okay, the egg's been mixed in and I still have a nice smooth mixture, so I'm just going to put the self-raising flour on the top. A traditional Bakewell is often flavoured with almonds. If you wanted to use almond essence instead of the vanilla essence that I put in, you could do that, but I prefer vanilla in mine. So I'm just folding this together until I get a nice soft cake mixture, which should be dropping consistency. There we go. Which means if I pick some of this up on my spoon and do that, it should just drop off. So this cake mixture needs to go on top of the jam and pastry in the cake tin, and because you are putting one mixture on top of another, the best way to do this is to take small amounts of your cake mix and put them to the edge of the tin first. So when you're putting one mixture on top of another and you do not want to have the bottom mixture rising to the top, the easiest way to do it is to put small amounts around the outside. The weight of the top mixture can sometimes force whatever mixture is underneath up the sides. So I've got small blobs of cake mix around the outside. I still have some cake mix left in my bowl, but I'm just going to use my spatula, or you could use a knife, and I am just going to make sure that the cake mixture is sealed to the pastry all the way around the edge of the Bakewell, so that I know that with any luck the jam should not bubble up the sides. It's another reason for not putting too much jam in the bottom of this. We don't want it all bubbling up the edge of the pastry. So when you're happy that you have a seal around the outside, you can slowly spread some of that cake mixture towards the middle, and I'm just going to put the rest of the cake mixture out of my bowl into the middle of this dish, and it should be, with any luck, just enough to close the gap on the top of the cake. So all of this cake mixture, it's only a 1 egg mixture, so it's not loads of cake mixture, but it is enough to just fill and cover that jam. Now, if you are running out of time in your lesson, then that might be as much as you can do, and your Bakewell may have to go in the oven like that. If you have time, you can make a lattice for the top with the extra pastry that you have. Okay, to make the lattice to go on top of my Bakewell, I've just flattened my ball of pastry into a strip, because this time I don't want it to be a circle. I want to be able to cut long strips from it. So rather than just turning it a little bit, I am turning it most times 180 degrees so that I can get nice long strips that will go on top of the Bakewell. Do need to do it a little bit in the other direction because I need it to be wide enough to cut more than one strip from, but I also need it to be long enough for the pastry strips to go all the way across the tin. If a few of them are slightly smaller, it doesn't matter because they're not going to go all the way across. So trim any edge and then cut pastry strips no wider than 1 centimetre. Something between 1/2 and 1 centimetre would be great. If you make these too thick, it can actually look quite ugly on top of your Bakewell, and we want the sponge mixture to be able to rise up in between the strips as well. So just cut as many pastry strips as you can, and then you are ready to do your lattice. And as I say, if you have really small strips, that doesn't matter. Before I do my lattice, I've just got my jug that I had the cold water in that I measured the pastry, and I'm just going to damp the edge of the pastry. You can do this with a pastry brush, that's fine, but if we don't damp the edge of this pastry, the lattice strips will not stick. So they will tend to come undone as your pastry is in the oven. So the way to do this is to choose some of your longest strips from the middle. You put one and then another one at 90 degrees, and then you have to just think for a little bit. So I'm going to put another 2 strips this way, but before I add any more strips at right angles to those, I can just put my next 2 at right angles. Before I do anything else, I've now got to make this into a lattice, because for a lattice, like in the middle strip, I'll just lift this up, excuse me, right, don't know if you can see that, but in the middle strip of pastry, it's now going under, over, under. These 2 that I've put on last are just going over all of the pastry, which means I need to weave these together to get the lattice effect. I've done this side of the lattice to make it go under, over, and all you need to do is move your pastry back and weave these together. And I tend to do it 1 strip at a time so that I have my unders and overs sorted. I find if I put too many strips on at once, I forget which way I am weaving them. So I tend to do a couple of strips at a time and just weave them together. And to keep this nice and even, I'm just going to put 2 more strips on. So that one needs to go over, under, over, and it needs to go under there. So the last one is going over this side, over here, and it needs to be under there and under there. Right. Having got all my pastry strips in place, I just need to press gently. You don't need to press so hard on these that you can actually see the tin through it. I'm just pressing gently into the watered pastry to hold those in place so that when I trim, that's going to stay in place. And then pick up your dish, use the back of a knife and trim round. If you're doing this in a foil dish, you might find that you can't hold it very easily because a foil dish is quite flexible when you pick it up. It's not as secure as this dish, so you might have to have it on your worktop and go round with your knife like that. I like to finish the edge of my pastry and I like to crimp it. You can, if you wish, just use a fork and just press the fork gently around the edge of your pastry, but I quite like mine when you press with one finger and then pinch with your finger and thumb. It doesn't matter how you finish the edge to your pastry, and having damped this pastry all round, this way can be a little bit sticky, but you just need to finish off and tidy up the edge of your pastry. Remember, your pastry is going to shrink as it cooks, so it will shrink in a little bit, and I'm going to leave it like that so you can see the effect of the fork or the crimping. This is going into the oven on a baking tray, gas mark 4, 180 degrees, for about 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, the Bakewell tart is cooked. It's had 25 minutes in the oven on 180 degrees. The pastry is browned and has shrunk slightly in from the edge of the dish, and in the middle there is no greasiness to be seen. All the pastry on the lattice is cooked. The cake has puffed up between the lattice, and if you touch it gently with your finger, it springs back. The cake in between the lattice is also golden brown, and you can see where I've fluted it how much it has pulled in from the edge of the dish. So always a good idea to flute because it just gives a nice finish to there. Here where I've pressed it with the fork, it's also shrunk in from the edge, but none of the bits of lattice pastry have come apart from the edge because they were damped with a little bit of water before it went into the oven.